Creation is groaning, climate change and environmental degradation. In 2016, the Louisiana Office of Community Development won a grant with $48 million reserved for the resettlement of the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw tribe due to sea level rise. Long ago, the tribe was forcibly relocated to Isle de Jean Charles, a sliver of island 80 miles southwest of New Orleans, by the Indian Removal Act. And now, more than 175 years later, they are Louisiana's first climate refugees. Once an island with nearly 300 families, Isle de Jean Charles has lost 98% of its land due to sea level rise. Can you imagine with me the costs of relocating millions in Miami or Bangladesh? The monetary costs and social disruptions associated with climate change are both here and likely to worsen in the decades to come if we fail to act. Throughout history, the Earth's climate has been changing. Just in the last 650,000 years, there have been 7 cycles of glacial advance and retreat, with the abrupt end of the last ice age about 11,700 years ago, marking the beginning of the modern climate era and of human civilization. The global average atmospheric carbon dioxide in 2019 was 409 parts per million. Parts per million being the number of particles in the air and how many per million are CO2. While a number just over 400 per million may seem insignificant, carbon dioxide levels today are higher than at any point in at least the past 800,000 years. Now, scientists attribute the global warming trend observed since the mid-20th century to the human expansion of the greenhouse effect, warming that results when the atmosphere traps heat radiating from Earth towards space. Now, it's also important that we understand the basic science of the greenhouse effect. When solar radiation reaches the Earth's atmosphere, some of this is reflected back into space. The rest of the sun's energy is absorbed by the land and the oceans, thus heating the Earth. Heat then radiates from Earth back towards space. Some of this heat is trapped by greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, keeping the Earth warm enough to sustain life. Meanwhile, human activities, such as the burning of fossil fuels, agricultural practices, and land clearing, are increasing the amount of greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere. And what does this do? This is trapping extra heat, thus causing the Earth's temperature to rise. And so what changes are we seeing? Well, for starters, the planet's average surface temperature has risen about 2 degrees Fahrenheit, or 1.14 degrees Celsius, since the late 19th century, a change that has been largely driven by increased carbon dioxide and other human-made emissions into the atmosphere. Most of the warming has occurred in the past 40 years, with the 6 warmest years on record taking place since 2014. In addition, the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets have decreased in mass. Greenland lost an average of 279 billion tons of ice per year between 1993 and 2019. Global sea level rose about 8 inches, or 20 centimeters, in the last century. The rate in the last 2 decades, however, is nearly double that of the last century and accelerating slightly every year. The number of record high temperature events in the United States has been increasing, while the number of record low temperature events has been decreasing since 1950. Environmental benefits and burdens have not always been distributed equally among communities. And it's no secret that many of these injustices, toxic waste dumps leaching chemicals into waterways, industrial facilities releasing pollutants causing cancer clusters, urban soils being contaminated with hazardous substances, happen disproportionately in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. As communities are forced to migrate, as climate change inundates low-lying lands or becomes too hot or too dry, it's oftentimes folks with resources who can move elsewhere. Meanwhile, poor folks in North America, farmers across the global south, islanders across the world, they will suffer while others can adjust. And so, what's the cause? How do we make sense of these large scale changes to our planet? What human activities are causing increased concentrations of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere and leading to a changing climate? Let's talk about just a few of them. Transportation. The transportation sector generates a large share of greenhouse gas emissions, which come primarily from burning fossil fuels for our cars, trucks, ships, trains, and planes. Over 90% of the fuel used for transportation is petroleum based, which includes primarily gasoline and diesel. Energy production. The energy created from the combustion of fossil fuels is used to produce heat, electricity, and generate power for homes, offices, manufacturing, and construction. Residential, commercial, and institutional sectors. The main sources of greenhouse gases for this sector are electricity consumed, energy used for heating and cooling, refrigeration, and so on. It's worth noting that there is a lot of crossover between this category and energy production. Agriculture, forestry, and other land use, also known as AFOLU. What we do with land, what we grow, raise, the land we convert, and the food we eat all have a sizable impact on the planet. We need farmers to be a part of the solution through carbon farming, regenerative agriculture, no-till agriculture, and other types of innovations that are already underway in places like Iowa, where farmers are already leading the way. AFOLU impacts on carbon emissions are twofold. For example, the clearing of forests for conversion into agricultural lands results in the decreased number of trees which can absorb carbon dioxide emissions. At the same time, animal agriculture releases not just carbon dioxide, but other greenhouse gases. Industry. The industrial sector that includes mining, manufacturing, and construction. The 5 industry categories of paper, food, petroleum refineries, chemicals, and metal or mineral products are responsible for contributing the most greenhouse gases. This is because the use and combustion of fossil fuels are essential to the various steps of manufacturing and industry processes. Believe it or not, every time we drive our cars, eat a meal, buy a consumer good online, or turn up the heat in our home, we're making decisions about how our resources are allocated and the impact our lives have upon the earth. But not in North America, right? We're innovators, problem solvers, frugal with our resources. We care about the environment. Well, as you can see, the data shows us that our greenhouse gas emissions have declined minimally over the past 15 years. On top of this, both the US and Canada are among the world leaders in total emissions and emissions per capita. Friends, it is both right and necessary to raise the alarms. Our planet is hurting, and it's about time we took bold steps to reverse course. Thus far, we've talked about the biblical and theological foundations for how we as people of faith are called by God to live in ecological kinship with the created world, to seek its flourishing, and to protect it from any harm that we or other humans may inflict upon it. Because remember, God's restoration includes the entire cosmos. We've covered how this call to serve the creation has been cast aside in many ways, as the excessive burning of fossil fuels, massive resource consumption, and living in excess has led to a creation that is hurting, a creation that is warming and being rapidly altered by human activity. Friends, we have a problem. To be Christian is to take God's commands about loving God and neighbor seriously. Now, whether consciously or unconsciously, the vast majority of us warm our homes, drive cars, eat food, and live in a way, compared to much of the developing world, that isn't sustainable. Now, this isn't a guilt trip, nor is it said so you throw up your hands in disillusionment. This is an honest assessment that what we are doing, both individually and societally, isn't working. So, how can we be better? How can we live more deeply into our call to discipleship?